Today we take a look at the Fyodor Pavlov Tarot. Now, I live in Berlin, and if you go to something like a modern dance performance in Berlin these days, and you look in the program, there'll be an artist statement, and quite often, 8 times out of 10, it'll say something along the lines of the artist in this piece is imagining queer utopias. What I want to say is that I think that tarot design is a thriving art form at the moment, and it is an arena, if you like, in which people can experiment with utopias. So we have, a broadly speaking, a young feminist utopia here, where it's not a bad deck, where, everyone's a woman. I mean, there's actually a whole genre of female tarots, isn't there? But this one in particular is kind of punchy and very nice too. And we also have black utopias, don't we? We have here the melanated classic tarot. Representation is important, especially in matters of power and magic. So here we have these powerful magical cards reinvented as an all-black deck. And that's one of my favorite decks. In the case of the Fyodor Pavlov Tarot, we have very much a queer utopia. We've had gay utopias before, which didn't particularly appeal to me. We've even had sort of pornographic gay utopias. But no, this is a queer utopia, and I know it is because it says so. Here's the little book about the artist. There's Fyodor Pavlov. Fyodor Pavlov is a queer, transgender Russian émigré and longtime New Yorker. The intersection of all these complex identities informs his work as an artist. Working primarily through the medium of watercolor and ink, he maintains a strong portfolio focused on multicultural motifs of history, queer sexuality, and esoteric occultism. His goal is to create images that tell stories and contextualize queer identity in a past where it always existed and reimagine it in a society liberated from suppression. He creates art that brings new life to the past for contemporary audiences and evokes a world in which the past is present, the present is queer, and gender is fluid. So there's a lot of queer in there, and I have nothing against this as a project. I'm a queer person. I'm actually a gay person, and kind of like broadly speaking queer, and I'm also a tarotist. So my allegiances are sometimes sort of, challenged. If there's someone creating a tarot and sort of sinning against the tarot in doing so because of their utopian agenda. Now, I think in the case of this one, Modern Witch, you might not like the end result, but the process of making this tarot was very reverent, and I think this deck is in some ways a very good project. Because the scenes are extremely faithful to Pamela Colman-Smith, and even the sort of the color palette, even though it's different, it has a sort of Pamela sort of attitude. It has the flat surfaces, it has the blocks of color. I think Pamela would quite like this deck. And similarly, the melanated classic, even though it's very, very different in color palette, they're absolutely gorgeous. And again, it's extremely close to Rider-Waite-Smith. It's almost a recoloring. It claims that it's a recreation, but really it's almost line for line the same. The faces are completely new, the faces and the hair, and of course the skin tones. So that's a lovely utopian reinvention of the tarot. Now, Fyodor Pavlov is not quite so reverent of the tarot, and I'll tell you what I mean as we go along. It's pretty close to the Rider-Waite-Smith, but it does take liberties, and we need to look at those liberties and decide whether or not this is the tarot that we want to work with. You may know, if you watch my channel, that I don't like pompous, oversized boxes. This was a Kickstarter project, and very nice too, and I don't know how much it cost. It's now on US game systems, and it's being touted around at a retail price of about £50 or dollars, and that's a lot. The question is, what do you get for that? They've taken on Mr. Pavlov's project wholesale, and they've given it a kind of like an indie price. Now, if you do things at large volume and you have them printed in China, as this is, it actually doesn't cost very much to create, a hardback book and reasonably nice tarot cards on reasonably nice cardstock, which I actually don't like, and gilded edges, and a reasonably solid box. I don't really approve of the economics of the whole thing, but let's put that to one side. The side effect of bringing something out with a great big fat book and, you know, selling them both in the same box is that the cards don't get a box of their own. In the 70s, they would have done. There were decks that, you know, you'd have a box inside the box, but no. Today, these cards do not have a box that fit them. So if you're a person who likes to put your tarot cards into a cute little bag, you're fine. If, like me, you don't like that, and you like your tarot cards to stay in boxes with pictures on, you're not fine, because this box is a space hog. So we want to know whether it's worth 50 euros or pounds or dollars or whichever it might be. I think design is Fyodor Pavlov's strong point. I don't think writing books about tarot is his strong point. And I think when US Game Systems buys up a project from Kickstarter, they just put it out. They don't necessarily worry about what it's like. As long as it did well on Kickstarter, they just want to cash in their chips, don't they? They want to just exploit the artist. And I think Mr. Pavlov is being exploited here to some extent. Copyright US Game Systems. There's no copyright Fyodor Pavlov, which I think is a bit alarming. There's nothing stating that this is his intellectual property. Putting that to one side, I don't think this book is very good. I don't think it makes the artist look good. I think it could have been edited, and I think certain less felicitous passages could have been struck out. He comes across as someone who has his own obsessions, and that sometimes gets in the way of clear thinking. Now, let me give you a few examples. He likes to talk about his creation of the deck, and I think that's very valuable. But he's got bees in his bonnet, ladies and gentlemen, as indeed many of us have these days. Let's look at the Hermit here, which I think is not his best card. He says, almost every Hermit card I have seen depicts a wise old white man. And while I recognise the cultural significance of that image and the reasons behind its continued perpetuation, it did not ring true for me. A woman, a witch, a midwife, a creative, a thinker, those archetypes felt more fitting for this card. Well, I would ask why. Ladies and gentlemen, the major arcana of the Rider-Waite-Smith deck is gender balanced. It's 7 male figures, 7 female figures, and about 7 cards in which either you have an androgynous figure or you don't have a main figure. On top of that, I just want to point out something about tarot tradition. This card, the Hermit, originally was called the Old Man, like right back in the 15th century when tarot was invented. In some decks, it was just called Time. This is an image relating to a Saturn energy. It's the energy of mortality. It's the energy of we have a limited amount of time on the planet. Now, in the original decks, it was an old man carrying an hourglass, looking at time running out. This was miscopied and it became a lantern. And then he became the Hermit, and then he became a symbol of introspection, which is fine. And I think, the truth is whatever's useful. But I think a lot has leaked out. I think the baby has been clearly thrown out with the bathwater. I think this is a terrible Hermit card. And, on the whole, this deck has quite a lot of a fairy tale aspect to it, which can be charming, but it can get in the way. And to any English person, this Hermit looks like Little Bo Peep. It's a young woman with a crooked scarf which you would use to catch your sheep. Little Bo Peep has lost her sheep and doesn't know where to find them. So, this is not a wise old white man. It's a young woman who looks like Little Bo Peep, who was not wise, although she is white. He can be quite dismissive, and I mean, he can come across as quite sulky. Listen to this. The Ten of Swords is not my favourite card in the deck. Of course, its meaning is rather dreary, but even visually I find it dark and unappealing and, dare I say it, a little boring in its fatalism. Well, this to me seems to be an example of someone creating a problem for themselves. You find it boring, well, let that go. Find a way of dealing with the Ten of Swords. I think his Ten of Swords is an extremely good graphic reinterpretation of the Ten of Swords, but really, I can't take a book seriously that says a tarot card is boring. Here's a real rabbit hole: the King of Swords. The King of Swords is a tricky card that I often butt heads with. You know how a certain kind of person, brackets, usually a heterosexual, usually cisgender, usually a man, brackets, always wants to debate you and then touts his intellectual superiority when the topic at hand does not emotionally affect him? Ignorant of the fact that being emotionally affected may mean that the person he is debating is actually better versed and more intimately familiar with the issue at hand. Well, yes, I have met people like that, and they do exist, and how annoying that is. But what's it got to do with designing a tarot or reading tarot cards? I mean, let it go, really. And then he goes on to say, well, this is not going to be my King of Swords. But where did he get the idea that this is who the King of Swords is? I'll give you maybe one more. He's really worried about offending people. He's worried that a celiac friend of his will be offended because he's got wheat in his pictures. Okay, last one, the Nine of Coins. The Nine of Coins is a card of wealth, a concept fraught and complicated by historical and cultural inequality and violence. Yes, our old friend, that word violence. Yes, nobody likes violence. It's a bad thing. What's it got to do with reading the tarot? There really isn't a problem around the concept of wealth when one is being, if you like, esoteric or therapeutic or helpful or healing. There are concepts such as abundance and prosperity. There are words that we can use that get us round all the problems of, as he puts it, living under capitalism. It's the sort of book that would provide an extremely bad foundation for anyone coming to tarot for the first time. He says here regarding Smith and Waite, Arthur Edward Waite commissioned the Rider-Waite deck and provided most of the modern interpretations of the cards. Oh, really? I mean, that just begs so many questions. It would take another video to answer that one. And then he says, Pamela Coleman Smith, a queer woman of colour, is responsible for the illustrations. Well, I think it's important for him to believe that. There is no evidence that Pamela Coleman Smith was queer. It's much more likely that she was just a suffragette, she was just a feminist, and she really didn't want to get married because if she had gotten married, her husband would have basically told her to stay in the kitchen. She was an artist, and that's slightly different. And as for her being a woman of colour, there is less than no evidence for that. In fact, there are researchers with plenty of evidence, and it's flying around YouTube. Pamela Coleman Smith was white and her folks were white. And there's even people who say they had shares in the slave trade. So let's hear no more about Pam Coleman Smith being a queer woman of colour. It won't wash. I'll just end by saying that the end of the book contains some useful spreads, just a few, and I don't know how he manages it, but he manages to get the Celtic cross spread completely screwed up. I've never seen anything like it. He says card 1 is the situation, card 2 is challenges, fair enough. Card 3, the one at the top, is the basis of the situation. Card 4 is the past. As Margaret Thatcher once memorably put it, no, 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 no. Okay, so it's almost a monochrome deck. It's on a sort of a slightly nondescript cream background. The majors have got splashes of colour, some more colourful than others. For example, that's probably the most colourful one. The minors are allowed one colour per suit. So you have a splash of green there for the wands, splash of blue for the cups, splash of red for the swords, and a splash of gold there for the pentacles. So as I say, for me it comes across as quite monochrome. I miss colours, I need colours in order to read with, but that's just a personal thing. I would say though that the major arcana and the minor arcana are not very clearly distinguished. The majors they've got the same border, the same kind of scale, whereas in the RWS you've got the majors are more concentrated, they're more packed into the frame, and the minors have got more space. These are all sort of very similar compositions. You've got the same frame, you've got the same cartouche at the top, an extra cartouche, a small extra cartouche at the bottom of the majors. But some of the majors look really like minors. Like for me, this sun card just looks like a minor arcana card. The sun's not very big, the figure's huge, and so on and so forth. So let's have a quick walkthrough, and I'll talk about my sort of theories about this deck as we walk it through. I think that's a fantastic Fool card. A Magician and a fantastic High Priestess, I think, and this rightfully lives on the box. This is truly a glorious image of the Oracle at Delphi, sitting on a chair with fumes coming up from the earth and putting her into her magical trance. So 3 pretty successful cards. I think that one's a bit dull, but these 2 are absolutely lovely. And also with this card, we see the first appearance in true pre-Raphaelite style of a face that is going to recur throughout this deck in a sort of obsessional way. And I'm very into that. I think that's brilliant. It just so happens there's something quite strange about this face. I think it's about a transgender statement, which is that it's female presenting but with a very big jaw. And he's gone so out of his way to make the jaw big and masculine that it looks like she's been to the dentist and had a wisdom tooth removed, and the jaw is really quite swollen. I think that's a bit unfortunate, and it does occur in the other appearances of that figure. Let's go to the next 3. 3, 4, 5. The style refers to, in a sense, the beauty traditions in art, or almost the decorative traditions. We've got a bit of decadence, we've got a bit of Aubrey Beardsley, a bit of Art Nouveau, we've got a bit of the Pre-Raphaelites, the decadent end of the Pre-Raphaelites, and I'm really into that. I think that's quite a significantly decadent empress. I think Pamela Coleman Smith would turn in her grave if she saw an empress wearing a corset. I think Pamela probably was one of those women who spent her lives fighting the corset. Here we have clearly a gay emperor, which I kind of enjoy. I will point out, though, that in this deck, and presumably for political reasons, there are no masculine men in positions of power. There are men with beards in position of power, but there are no macho men in positions of power. So we have, the Emperor and the King of Wands are both played, I would say, by Conchita Wurst. The Charioteer and the Six of Batons, the victor in the Six of Batons, I would say are entirely non-binary. And the King of Cups, I would say, is clearly gay identified. We have one vaguely macho man in a position of power in the Tarot's last card, the King of Pentacles. So that is a concession to someone who is a bit heavier on their feet in a sort of testosterone sort of way. I also noticed in this tarot that his skill in drawing the human figure, it comes and goes. So these more masculine men in the deck, usually they're consigned to, field labourers and bakers and things like that. They often have quite strange physiques. These are quite sort of uncomfortable figures. I've also noticed that in this deck, people tend to have quite short legs. It's quite strange in a deck which is so much about elegance to have these short-legged figures. Most manifestations of elegance elongate the legs. So back to the flip-through, we have the Lovers there, the Chariot, and Strength. I noticed that most reviewers sort of avoid talking about the Lovers. It's a reference to Dürer's Adam and Eve, isn't it? With, what should we say, modern bodies. I also think that this deck is an odd mixture of the kind of fairy tale level, which implies quite a child-friendly attitude, and then this very much sexual politics element of the deck, which means it's completely un-office friendly. I mean, that is, I think, quite a strange and sexualized image for the goddess of fortune there. Here's the return, the obsessive return of that face with the strong jaw. I think the artist is at his best drawing figures with this particular sort of goddess-like character. That's another fantastic card, I think. Here we have the Hanged Man, with a little bit of extra SM, a Death card and a Temperance card. So 3 really good cards in that screen. And I think this is entirely not office friendly. This is really quite a hardcore, I would say, sexual fantasy of being ravished, and I'm using that word very euphemistically, ravished by death itself, ravished by a skeleton. I've noticed that, different reviewers identify this figure as male or female. I would say it's a male body with a female face. I think that's an extremely intense image, an extremely good image. And there's a lot in this deck that I don't think comes anywhere close to being as good as that image. It feels like he loses his way in the minor arcana. I also think, incidentally, this is an extremely good image. It's just extremely successful graphically. So here we have this lascivious card that I spoke of earlier, a fantastic tower, and the third appearance of the lady with the big jaw. And again, reviewers shy away from this, ladies and gentlemen, but we're going to have a look at this devil card. It is extremely sweaty. You would have to choose your client quite carefully before whipping out the Fyodor Pavlov Tarot, because they might draw that card and they might have nightmares for a week afterwards. A moon card? I don't like that moon card. I don't like that sun card, and I don't like that judgment card. I find it quite unfortunate that the branch just shaves a bit off it there. So it's like a damaged circle. And I also think it's a shame that, he chose to diverge from traditional tarot imagery just at this point where you're dealing with the most sensationally surrealistic image to come out of the Middle Ages. The moon in the tarot, 2 towers, a dog, a wolf, and a lobster. What could be better? And also there's a message in the dog and the wolf. I've talked about this before. Between the dog and the wolf was a classical Roman expression meaning you don't know whether you're coming or going, because it's dusk, the time when the dog comes home and the wolf goes out. So are you coming in or going out? Are you coming or going? So the moon card, it's a great card, and I don't think that's an improvement. I don't like this particularly. I think the figure's too big, the sun's too small. The 2 legs with different coloured tights are quite confusing. It always looks like that figure has 1 leg. And here I think that's a real mistake, that judgment card. The judgment card is about resurrection. It's not actually so much about judgment. In early tarots, it wasn't even always called judgment. It was sometimes called the angel. But the point is, it's new life. The important thing about the card is people jumping out of their graves. And I think the artist here has just taken it at absolute face value, judgment, judgment, judgment. So they are being judged. They are desperate. They aren't necessarily even getting out of their graves. And I think that's a pity, because it turns this card into a second death card. And I wouldn't read with a deck that contained that image. Finally, the world card, which I kind of do and don't like. I was watching Lisa Papez's review of this deck, and she asks quite a reasonable question, which is that why is there a current tendency to depict the world card as, if you like, an Earth Mother, as a Gaia figure, as a full-figured female person, in this case with a great cornucopia around her? Well, because I suppose people are responding to the word world, world, earth, Gaia. But for the early tarot designers, the world card was not just the world, it was the universe, it was the cosmos, it was everything, it was the holy city. It was absolute completion. And what's ironic about this is that there is evidence that the world card is based on a hermaphrodite god of the ancient classical world called Phanes. And you have this hermaphrodite figure with the signs of the zodiac around them. So I find it quite ironic that in this deck, which is so much about trans people and non-binary people and queerness, that the one place where it would have been absolutely terrific to see a trans body, we don't get one. So let's have a look at the minors. A splash of green for the wands, and why not? Wands are a fire sign, but wands grow out of the earth, don't they? Very nice too. Very nice too. Again, we're not quite sure of the genre here. It's a funny style, isn't it? Because sometimes it's decorous, and sometimes it's indecorous. I find a sort of a discomfort in it somehow. Going into cups. A cute two of cups. I think the aces are terrific. I think that's an absolutely terrific ace. I also think that he's most comfortable, certainly with the men, drawing what you might call gay identifying men, a sort of another Conchita Wurst figure. They seem to be anatomically very elegant and very nice. I would say, though, that I think this is a mistake, this card. We've got Three of Cups dancing around a maypole. Well, the Three of Cups, Pamela Coleman Smith was a feminist and a suffragette. And apart from, disapproving of wearing corsets and getting married and all the rest of it, she saw the Three of Cups as a suffragette pledge. So they are celebrating, but they are celebrating, their suffragette work. And I think, again, she would turn in her grave if she could see them dancing around a maypole, which is, as we all know, a phallic object. Some nice cards here, all terrific. And if we look here, we see here a picture of the author. It's him. And this is the one part of the deck that I wholeheartedly like. And this is the one part of the book that is really good, because he's put himself into the tarot. And this is Six of Cups, it's the past. And he talks about his memories of his childhood and emigrating, and he stops being angry and fretful and obsessed with the patriarchy, and he just talks about things that touch him. And so we have a real sweetness in this image. Going into the swords, a terrific Two of Swords, a Grizzly 3, and so on. I think the swords is pretty strong in this deck. I'm going to stop here. I think that's a really unusual and very strong Nine of Swords. And again, I think that 10 is one of the best cards in the pack. The reason why I'm being kind of harsh about this deck, well, is because I'm a reviewer and, I have things that I want to say. But it's because I do feel a certain sense of disappointment that I really, really wanted to like it. When I see an image like that, I think, wow, that's so modern, that's so stylish, that's so graphic. I think the aces are all terrific. I think that's another great ace. And that's another lovely card, that too. I haven't shown you the court cards yet because that for me is a different subject. These are all great. There's a lot of bread being thrown around in his suit of pentacles. I can't quite tell whether people are giving each other bread or money, but, what's the difference? I once cooked breakfast for a Russian friend of mine, and I put the breakfast on the table, and it was bacon, eggs and beans. It was everything. It was very nice. I said to him, is that okay? Is that breakfast okay? And he looked at me like I was mad, and he looked at the food and he looked back at me and he said, Robert, it's a full plate. I'm Russian. Of course it's okay. Okay, so when we look at Pavlov's court cards, they are a decorative and attractive bunch. I tend to think that the court cards is where most modern decks fall down, or at least it's where I part company from most modern decks, because for me, it's not enough that the court cards are just decorative. They have to be archetypes. They have to really contain quite a lot of meaning. They have to work, in a sense, like major arcana cards. It's a quarter of the pack. They're going to come down on your table quite a lot. And to be fair on modern tarot designers, there is really very, very little consensus about what the court cards mean. There is a huge amount of confusion about the meaning of the court cards. And you've got to sort of take a view. You've got to decide which way you're going to go with your depictions of the court cards. But I think you do need to have a plan, because if you don't have a plan, they're just cute figures holding batons or coins or swords. Now, one thing you can do is that you can look at Pamela's court cards, and I think it is a matter of looking at them rather than reading A.E. Waite's descriptions of them. You can look at Pamela's court cards and you can pick up on clues that are hidden in them. Clearly, Pamela was pretty imaginative and pretty intuitive and psychic, but she was also being fed, as we keep hearing, research material by A.E. Waite. She was being given lists of astrological correspondences. She was being given lists of Kabbalistic meanings and so forth. So when we look at Pamela Coleman Smith's court cards, and I think we should, because we are talking about the Rider-Waite-Smith system, we see in Pamela's designs quite a lot of correspondences, hidden meanings, clues. There's a lot that can help us to use these cards for divination. Let me give you an example. Here is the Knight of Cups and the Death card. And as soon as this is pointed out to you, you can't help noticing that they are echoing each other. The horse is very, very similar what it's doing. The figure is in very much a similar pose. The Knight of Cups comes with an offering. Death also comes with a kind of offering. Even the landscape behind them is slightly similar. The wings on his helmet are echoed by Death's helmet. So why on earth would you have the Knight of Cups, the lovely knight, the symbol of emotions, why on earth would you have him coming across as a sort of echo of Death? Well, the Knight of Cups is considered to be connected to the sign of Scorpio in the Golden Dawn's system. And Scorpio is the sign of death. I think this is quite profound, because the arrival of love does throw us into a sort of existential panic, because love makes you think of death. If you really fall in love with someone, you get scared that they will die. Orgasms are called the little death. Sex and death are biologically linked. There are microscopic organisms that don't have sex, and they also don't die. So sex and death arrived in our world at the same time. So that's the sort of thing that you can see in Pamela's cards. And if you're looking for meanings for the court cards, you can just look, And there are commentators like Yolanda Robinson. She's a Kabbalistic commentator who is very strong on the court cards. She talks about how solid, the Knight of Pentacles is, how solid his horse is, how they look attentive, how they look like they're taking things very seriously. She's absolutely brilliant about the Page of Swords, and she points out that these birds in the sky form the shape of a fish. And she talks about how the unformed material of the subconscious, which comes from the watery realm, from the fish, then goes into the airy realm of the mind and becomes a concept. So you progress from Page of Cups to Page of Swords. This is all quite subtle stuff, but what I'm saying is that there are systems behind the court cards. There's the Golden Dawn system, and earlier than Golden Dawn, there are these slightly chaotic pre-esoteric systems. Like, for example, you can read Paul Hewson's books and you can find that the playing card figures, those 12 figures, had connections in the popular imagination to famous people from myth and history. Like the King of Pentacles was Alexander the Great, the Queen of Swords was Pallas Athene, and so on and so forth. The knights who came later, they didn't pick up on any of these associations. But, these things give you clues. Now, for example, in the case of the Page of Swords, it's very useful to know that during the early days of tarot, he was considered to be a spy. The Page of Swords is an observer, and he might be observing you. You know, he's a thinker. He's not warm. He's not loyal to you. He's not your servant. He's doing his own thing. He might be a tricky customer. Now, I think it's very useful to have that as an archetype in your deck. You can take any of this stuff or leave it. You build your own tarot temple, but I think that there's a lot of stuff out there that you can find out which is definitely historically true about tarot. Okay, now I think that Fyodor Pavlov's court cards are less strong, less suggestive than most of the rest of his deck. And it feels like he's not exactly turned on when he's designing them. Like, for example, he was when he designed the Death card or when he designed the High Priestess card, which are both cards, I think, which hold a huge amount of energy for him and for us. Let's have a look at the suits. Now, what I'm building up to is that I don't think these court cards have a huge amount of content, or at least not content that I recognise as part of what you might call a pre-existing tarot system or systems. The Knight of Wands is one of Pamela's more phallic sort of energies, even though her knights were, notoriously androgynous in the face. I think this horse is rearing up as Pavlov's horse is, but the horse is really blushing. And there's a lot of fire flaring out from this knight. Frankly, I think it's a really phallic energy. And, okay, fine to put a woman in a phallic myth, but I don't see a huge amount of storytelling in that particular woman. We don't really know anything about her mood. The King and the Queen, so... we have the next appearance of Conchita Wurst, and then we have the Queen. Well, I'm not the only person to notice this. As Lisa Papez has pointed out, the Queen of Wands is a notoriously sensual and sexual being. A very early recorded meaning for the Queen of Wands is that she was just known as whore. And that, for me, is not a derogatory term. I think she's a powerfully sexual woman. So what's she doing in that dress, and what's she doing with that extraordinary expression on her face? She seems repressed. She seems bundled up. She seems not at all recognisable as the Queen of Battens. Let's look at the cups. We have a page and a knight. I think that's a much better couple of court cards there. We have an artistic page getting inspiration from a magical fish leaping out of the cup. And we have what you might call a sort of completely unesoteric Knight of Cups, just an image of gentleness, which certainly one could work with. The King and the Queen, we have what you might vaguely call a non-macho king, I think. And the Queen of Cups, well, she's pregnant. Why? It seems she's been chosen at random to be pregnant. I would have thought the queen closest to the Empress, who is the classically the mother of the tarot, I would have thought that's the Queen of Pentacles. And for the king, I think something has been lost. There was this very powerful image of someone whose throne was floating on the ocean. A rather heavy Page of Swords. The element of swords is air, it is intellect. And that guy, though he is very nice, he looks like he is more interested in working out at the gym and making sure he's got plenty to eat. And I can't say I think that's a very successful image. It is certainly fair enough and quite credible to have what appears to be a female figure as the archetypal warrior, even social justice warrior, you could say. But nevertheless, there is something quite, I think, unsatisfactory about the figure being really dwarfed by her horse and by her sword. The King and the Queen. As far as I can see, there is really no astrological content in those cards. And indeed, not very much elemental content. There are some whirling clouds behind the Queen, but not really behind the King. Both these characters in the tarot have huge amounts of lore ascribed to them. Perhaps the Queen, most of all. The Queen of Swords probably has more lore attached to her than any other card in the pack, in a sense. Even in the playing card packs, she's the Queen of Spades, Sweaty Betty. She's the pure bad luck card, and she has a story. She's known as a widow. She's someone who has suffered and has survived. I think that the archetype of the survivor is very useful in a modern tarot practice. And here I don't see anything about a judge. My objection to all this is that the court cards look like they've been scrubbed clean of anything controversial or anything that might offend. And the result is something that doesn't really carry very much content. We have a page and a knight here, very nice for the page. Pentacles, the suit of pentacles he's done quite literally. It's very much about bread and earth. Pentacles can be about art and so forth, but let that go. Disabled guy for the Knight of Coins. Well, I mean, this is a huge topic. Coincidentally, I am actually temporarily disabled while making this video. I've got sciatica, I'm in great pain, and I can't walk. And the one thing that I can't do is be there for people. And so I think it is quite controversial to choose this card for your less able-bodied person in the tarot. This image could have appeared in a number of different places. I think that's very interesting, and I think in some ways it belongs in an art gallery, but I'm not sure it belongs in a working tarot deck. And the King and the Queen. Yes, it's all about food for her. The image of the garden has gone, and again for the King it seems to be all about money and the image of fruitfulness and wine and so forth. That rather louche aspect of the King has gone. But I think those two are quite pretty cards. Those were my thoughts about the Fyodor Pavlov Tarot. Currently available from all the usual outlets. I'm Robert Farah, this is Tea and Tarot, and I'll be back next week. Bye.